In a distant galaxy far beyond the reach of human imagination, there existed an alien kingdom where beauty was not just admired, it was everything. It defined status, power, and even one's right to be seen. The inhabitants of this radiant world possessed luminous skin, perfectly symmetrical features, and an almost ethereal glow that reflected their rigid ideals. Among them, perfection was not a goal, it was a requirement. In the heart of this kingdom stood a magnificent palace carved from crystal like minerals that shimmered under twin suns. Within its walls lived Princess Zarya, the only heir to the throne. Yet unlike the rest of her kind, Zarya was born with deep, visible marks across her face. Jagged patterns that disrupted the flawless aesthetic her people worshiped. From the moment she was born, silence replaced celebration. What should have been a moment of joy turned into one of quiet shame. As she grew older, Zarya was hidden away from the world. The palace corridors became her entire universe, and even within them, she was kept in dimly lit chambers, away from reflective surfaces and curious eyes. Servants were instructed not to speak of her. Visitors were told she was too fragile to meet. In truth, the kingdom feared her, not because she was dangerous, but because she was different. Zarya spent her days by a single tall window, gazing out at a world she was never allowed to be part of. She watched festivals unfold in bursts of color, saw laughter carried through the air, and observed people moving freely under the open sky. Often, she would touch her face gently, tracing the marks she had come to associate with isolation. A question lived quietly in her heart: was she truly unworthy, or had the world simply refused to see her? Years passed, and the kingdom continued to thrive in its obsession with beauty until one day something unprecedented occurred. A delegation from Earth arrived. Humans, unlike the aliens, were diverse in appearance, some tall, some short, some bearing scars, wrinkles, or imperfections. Their presence alone stirred curiosity and discomfort among the kingdom's people. Among the delegation was a young man named Arav. He stood out even among humans, not just for his striking appearance, but for the calm confidence in his demeanor. Where others marveled at the alien world, Arav observed it with thoughtful eyes, as if searching for something deeper beneath its polished surface. When he learned of the hidden princess, he grew intrigued. The palace officials tried to dismiss his curiosity, insisting that the princess was not to be seen. But Arav persisted. There was something about the secrecy that felt wrong to him, something that hinted at a truth the kingdom was unwilling to confront. After much insistence, the royal council reluctantly agreed to let him meet her, though they prepared themselves for embarrassment. They expected him to react like everyone else, with discomfort, pity, or quiet rejection. Zarya was informed only moments before the meeting. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and fragile hope. She had never met an outsider before, let alone someone who had chosen to see her. As she stood in the dim chamber, she resisted the urge to hide, even as doubt crept into her thoughts. When Arav entered, the room felt still. For a brief moment, he simply looked at her. Zarya braced herself, expecting the familiar shift, the widening of eyes, the hesitation, the step back, but it never came. Instead, Arav smiled. It was not a forced or polite smile. It was warm, genuine, and filled with something Zarya had never seen directed at her before: acceptance. He stepped closer, his gaze steady, not avoiding her face, but meeting it fully. "I've never seen eyes this honest," he said softly. Zarya blinked, caught off guard. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever looked beyond the marks. They tell a story. Arav continued, his voice calm yet certain, not of imperfection, but of strength. "You've lived in a world that refused to understand you, and you're still standing." For the first time, Zarya felt something shift within her. The weight she had carried for years, the belief that she was less, that she was broken, began to loosen. Arav did not ignore her scars. He redefined them. Their conversation stretched on, moving from hesitant words to open exchange. Zarya spoke of her loneliness, her questions, her longing to be seen. Arav listened, not with pity, but with respect. In return, he shared stories of Earth, a place where beauty existed in countless forms, where differences were not always feared, and where people, imperfect learned to find meaning beyond appearances. When they finally stepped out of the chamber together, the palace fell silent. Eyes turned, whispers spread, and disbelief rippled through the crowd. The hidden princess stood in the open, her marks visible for all to see. Then Arab did something no one expected. He reached out and gently took her hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of defiance against an entire culture. Gasps echoed through the hall. The unthinkable had happened. Not only had someone accepted her, but he had done so openly, without hesitation. Zarya felt the warmth of his hand, and with it, a courage she had never known. For the first time, she did not feel the need to hide. She stood tall, not despite her differences, but with them, that moment marked a turning point, not just for Zarya, but for the entire kingdom. The people who had once defined beauty so narrowly were forced to confront a new perspective. They saw, perhaps for the first time, that what they had dismissed as flaw could hold meaning, resilience, and truth. And as whispers turned into reflection, and reflection into change, the kingdom slowly began to evolve. Because in a world that had worshipped perfection, it took one honest gaze to reveal that true beauty had never been about the face at all. Princess Zarya was born under the glow of twin suns in a distant galaxy where beauty was not just admired but worshipped as the highest truth. In the alien kingdom of Lethera, perfection was the law of existence, shaping every life, every opportunity, and every destiny. From the moment a child opened their eyes, their worth was silently measured against flawless standards that no one dared to question. It was a world of symmetry, radiance, and unspoken judgment, where even the slightest imperfection could cast a shadow over an entire life. On the day Zarya was born, the palace was prepared for celebration. The heir to the throne was expected to embody the pinnacle of beauty, a living symbol of the kingdom's ideals. But when the royal attendants first saw her face, the air shifted. Across her delicate features ran deep, jagged scars, unlike anything ever seen among their kind. These were not wounds inflicted by time or accident. They were part of her, etched into her skin from birth, breaking every expectation the kingdom held sacred. Silence fell over the chamber. The joy that should have echoed through the halls turned into whispers of disbelief. The queen held her daughter close, torn between love and the fear of what this meant for her future. The king, bound by tradition and the weight of his people's beliefs, said nothing for a long time. In that silence, a decision was made, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. The princess would be hidden. Zarya grew up within the secluded wings of the palace, far from the vibrant life of Lethera. Her world was made of quiet corridors, soft shadows, and carefully chosen attendants who were instructed never to speak of her appearance. Mirrors were removed from her chambers, as if denying her reflection could somehow protect her from the truth. Yet even without seeing herself, Zarya could feel the difference. It lived in the way people hesitated around her, in the pauses between their words, in the distance they kept. As a child, she often asked why she could not walk among her people. The answers were always vague, wrapped in gentle excuses that never satisfied her curiosity. She was told she was special, that she needed protection, that the world outside was not ready. But as she grew older, those words began to feel less like comfort and more like a barrier she could not cross. Despite her isolation, Zarya was not without awareness. From a tall, narrow window in her chamber, she could see glimpses of the kingdom. She watched the citizens of Lethera move gracefully through luminous gardens, their forms glowing with effortless perfection. She saw celebrations filled with music and light, where beauty was not only present but performed, admired, and rewarded. These distant scenes filled her with both wonder and longing, a quiet ache that settled deep within her heart. Over time, Zarya began to imagine what it would feel like to stand among them, not hidden or shielded, but seen. She wondered if there was something beyond what her people believed, something that could not be measured by flawless skin or perfect features. Yet those thoughts were fragile, easily overshadowed by the weight of everything she had been taught without words. One day, curiosity overcame her fear. In a forgotten corner of her chamber, she discovered a small reflective surface that had been overlooked. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. her breath unsteady. For the first time, she saw herself clearly. The scars were real, more intricate and striking than she had imagined, tracing patterns across her face like a map of something unknown. At first, the sight overwhelmed her. She felt the sting of all the unspoken truths she had sensed throughout her life. This was what had kept her hidden, what had made her different, what had defined her existence in the eyes of others. But as she continued to look, something unexpected happened. The scars did not change, but her perception of them began to shift, if only slightly. They were not random. They had shape, depth, and a strange kind of beauty that did not fit within the rigid ideals of her world. That realization did not erase her pain, nor did it free her from the life she had been given, but it planted a seed, a quiet question that refused to fade. What if beauty was not as simple as her people believed? What if it was something more complex, something that could not be reduced to perfection alone? As the years passed, that question grew within her, shaping her thoughts and her sense of self. Though the kingdom continued to hide her, Zarya began to understand that her existence itself challenged the very foundation of their beliefs. She was living proof that something different could exist, even in a world that denied it. And while the galaxy beyond Lethera remained vast and unknown, Zarya's story had already begun to change something, even if no one else could yet see it. Because of her appearance, Princess Zarya became a living contradiction in a kingdom that worshipped perfection above all else. In Lethera, beauty was more than a preference. It was a rigid law that shaped identity, destiny, and belonging. From the earliest days of her life, it was clear that she did not fit into the narrow definition her people held sacred. The deep scars across her face were seen not as a natural variation, but as something unsettling, something that disrupted the harmony the kingdom prided itself on maintaining. As she grew, the reaction of her people became impossible to ignore. Servants assigned to her care carried out their duties with quiet efficiency, but rarely met her gaze. Conversations would falter when she entered a space, even within the limited areas she was allowed to access. There was no open cruelty, no harsh words spoken directly to her, yet the silence itself became a form of rejection. It told her more clearly than any insult that she did not belong. The royal court treated her existence as a delicate secret. Advisors urged the king and queen to keep her hidden, fearing that her presence might disturb the morale of the people or weaken the image of perfection the monarchy was meant to represent. They spoke of stability, of tradition, of preserving the values that had defined Lethera for generations. In their carefully measured words, Zarya was no longer just a princess. She had become a problem to be managed. So the decision was made to isolate her completely. Entire sections of the palace were sealed off, transformed into a private world where she could exist without being seen. Guards ensured that no one entered without permission, and those who did were chosen for their discretion rather than their compassion. The outside world, vibrant and full of life, became something she could only observe from a distance. For Zarya, the isolation was not just physical but deeply emotional. She learned early on to read the unspoken language of those around her. The slight hesitation before someone responded to her, the way their posture stiffened, the careful neutrality in their tone. These small signals accumulated over time, shaping her understanding of herself. She began to internalize the idea that she was fundamentally different, that there was something about her that made others uncomfortable. What hurt her most was not the absence of admiration, but the absence of connection. She did not crave praise or validation in the way her people did. Instead, she longed for something simpler, something more human, to be seen, to be spoken to without hesitation, to be treated as if she mattered beyond the surface of her appearance. Yet those moments never came. Even acts of kindness toward her felt distant, as if filtered through an invisible barrier that no one was willing to cross. As the years passed, the isolation began to shape her identity in profound ways. She grew quieter, more introspective, finding solace in her own thoughts rather than in the company of others. Books, recordings, and fragments of history became her companions, offering glimpses of perspectives beyond the rigid ideals of her world. Through them, she began to understand that not all civilizations measured worth in the same way, that there were places where difference was not automatically seen as a flaw. Still, knowledge alone could not fill the void left by isolation. There were moments when the silence of her chambers felt overwhelming, when the distance between her and the rest of the world seemed impossible to bridge. She would stand by her window for hours, watching the people of Lithara move freely, their lives unfolding in ways she could only imagine. Their laughter carried faintly through the air, a reminder of everything she had been denied. Despite everything, a part of Zarya resisted the narrative imposed upon her. It was a quiet, stubborn part, one that refused to fully accept that she was unworthy of belonging. She could not explain where it came from, but it persisted even in her loneliest moments. It showed itself in the way she continued to wonder about the world beyond her confinement, in the way she questioned the values that had led to her isolation. The kingdom, meanwhile, continued to operate as it always had, its people largely unaware of the depth of the princess's existence. To them, she was little more than a rumor, a whispered anomaly that the palace chose not to acknowledge. This collective avoidance allowed them to maintain their beliefs without challenge, to continue valuing perfection without confronting its consequences. Yet isolation, no matter how complete, could not erase Zarya's presence entirely. She existed, and her existence carried a quiet tension within the fabric of Lithara. Even unseen, she represented a truth the kingdom had not yet faced, that their definition of beauty was not absolute, and that in rejecting her, they were also limiting themselves. In the stillness of her hidden world, Zarya continued to grow, shaped by rejection, but not entirely defined by it. The isolation imposed upon her was powerful, but it was not infinite. Somewhere beyond the walls of the palace, change was possible, even if it had not yet begun. She spent her life hidden deep within the silent chambers of the palace, far removed from the vibrant world that existed just beyond its towering walls. For Princess Zarya, the palace was not a place of luxury or privilege, but a carefully constructed cage designed to keep her unseen. Every corridor she walked echoed with emptiness. Every room felt too large for a life so confined, and every passing day blended into the next with quiet, unchanging stillness. Though she was royalty by name, her existence lacked the very thing that gave life meaning. Connection. From a young age, Zarya became accustomed to solitude. The few attendants assigned to her were respectful, but distant, their presence more functional than warm. They fulfilled their duties without question, bringing her meals, arranging her space, and ensuring her needs were met. Yet they never lingered long enough to form a bond. Their politeness carried an invisible boundary, one that reminded her again and again that she was different. It was not cruelty that defined her environment, but absence, the absence of affection, of laughter, of genuine human closeness. Her days followed a quiet, predictable rhythm. She would wake to the soft glow of filtered light entering through high, narrow windows, light that never fully illuminated her surroundings. She spent hours wandering the same halls, tracing the intricate patterns carved into the walls, as if memorizing them could somehow fill the emptiness inside her. At times, she would sit by the window, watching distant figures move through the gardens below, their lives unfolding freely in ways she could only imagine. The faint echoes of celebration, carried by the wind, felt like whispers from a world that did not belong to her. Zarya often wondered what it meant to be truly seen. Not looked at with hesitation or avoided with quiet discomfort, but seen with understanding, with acceptance, with warmth. It was a feeling she could not fully grasp, only imagine through fragments of stories she read or overheard. In those stories, people formed connections effortlessly, finding comfort in one another's presence. To her, such bonds felt almost unreal, like something that existed only in distant worlds or in the minds of dreamers. There were moments when the weight of her isolation pressed heavily against her chest, making it difficult to breathe. In those moments, she would question everything: her place in the kingdom, her worth as a person, the reason she had been brought into a world that refused to embrace her. The silence of the palace offered no answers, only reflections of her own thoughts, looping endlessly without resolution. Yet even in her loneliness, Zarya held on to a quiet resilience. She found small ways to endure, to create meaning within the confines of her limited world. She immersed herself in knowledge, reading about distant galaxies, unfamiliar cultures, and lives that unfolded differently from her own. Through these glimpses, she began to understand that existence was far more vast and varied than the narrow perspective she had been given. There were places, she realized, where difference was not hidden, where uniqueness was not feared. Still, understanding did not erase longing. The desire to be loved, to be accepted without condition, remained a constant presence within her. It was not a loud or demanding desire, but a steady, persistent ache that shaped her every thought. She imagined what it would feel like for someone to look her without turning away, to speak to her without hesitation, to reach out without fear. These imaginings became both her comfort and her sorrow, offering hope while reminding her of what she lacked. As the years passed, Zarya grew into herself in quiet, unseen ways. Her thoughts deepened, her awareness expanded, and her sense of identity slowly began to form, not from the reflections of others, but from within. She began to understand that her existence, though hidden, still held value. It was a fragile realization, one that wavered in the face of her loneliness, but it persisted nonetheless. The palace remained unchanged, its walls as imposing and silent as ever, but within them, Zarya continued to live, to think, to feel. Though the world had chosen not to love her, she did not entirely lose the ability to hope that one day, somehow, that might change.